Hello and welcome, everyone, to electionspeakers.com, the place for a unique critique of the important speakers of this 2012 presidential campaign. My name is Dr. Dennis Becker, and I'll be your host for these special podcasts, which are designed to give voters valuable information needed to make a confident decision on November 6th. We'll be watching and listening to the candidates and others who are trying to win your vote. Their talking techniques and their tactics are our exclusive topic for this unique critique. And joining me today, as she has every day for the last 4 years, is our Director of Executive Education, the Senior Speech Coach here at the Speech Improvement Company, Laurie Schloff. Welcome, Laurie.
Hello, Dennis.
In addition to Laurie, left to right around your radio dial is Senior Coach Monica Murphy. Monica, welcome today.
Thanks, Dennis. Great to be here.
And on the other side of the aisle is our Senior Coach and Storytelling Coach, Robin Maxfield. Welcome, Robin.
Thanks, Dennis. Good evening, everyone.
Now, before we get started, before we get into talking about our two candidates tonight, and tonight we're talking about Marco Rubio and, of course, Mitt Romney, because tonight is the 30th of August, 2012, and the night when Mitt Romney was nominated for the presidential campaign. Now, before we get into that, Laurie, would you share a little bit with our listeners about how we are scoring these debates?
Sure. It's important to keep in mind that we're looking at presentation skills as opposed to politics. So what we want to do is to be objective and also be somewhat educational and help our listeners to understand the kinds of dimensions that speech coaches are looking at and listening for. So we have a scorecard, and by the way, listeners can actually get a hold of the scorecard by downloading it on our website, electionspeakers.com. And we have 10 different dimensions that are scored. So I'm not going to name every single one of them, but one includes eye contact, how interesting the speaker was, the use of language, the connection with the audience. The highest score you can get in each dimension is 10 points. So a perfect score is 100 points, but no one gets that.
All right, well, let's see how close we get to that tonight. And Monica Murphy, I'd like to start with you. Let's start talking about Marco Rubio. First of all, just give me a quick impression. How did you like him as a speaker? How did he do tonight?
Dennis, overall, I thought Rubio did a terrific job. I gave him a 70 out of a possible 100. And I think that one of the things that he did such a great job with was the language that he used and the way he phrased things. I thought his phrasing was very, very effective. For example, the time when he was talking about his father stood behind the bar in the ballroom so that he could stand in the front of the room. I just thought the way he phrased things really painted a picture for listeners.
Well, in other words, he told the story well. You like the way he told the stories. Well, let's turn to our storytelling coach, Robin Maxfield. Robin, how did he tell the story? What do you think?
I thought he was great at telling story, and specifically when he introduced Mitt by telling a story about Mitt's father. And the effectiveness of that story was in the details and the execution of it. He launched the story, it was as if it was already in the middle of the story. It wasn't like, now I'm going to tell you a story about. He was in the story came alive, and it was a very effective way to introduce Mitt.
It's interesting. I thought he did a better job telling the stories than he did with anything else in the speech. And he's a very good speaker, Marco Rubio. I mean, generally speaking, he's a good speaker. And part of the problem I think he has is that he is a good speaker. He has a good voice, good articulation and pronunciation, but he uses it all the time. And this tonight's speech was interesting because it was one of the better times I've heard him speak. When you hear him doing an interview, he's very fast. He's very quick to answer a question. I mean, that's not a bad thing, but the pace of it, and we've talked about pace on these podcasts all the time, we talk about that. The rate of speed of speaking, the pace of speed of speaking, to me was a little bit fast. He was better around the aspects of the storytelling, as Robin and Monica have said. But for the rest of it, I would have liked a little bit more of a change in pace. Laurie, what do you think?
Yeah, I had trouble thinking about him as a great speaker. I thought he had memorable lines, memorable stories, as you both have said, but I didn't find him a particularly memorable speaker. I didn't find myself fascinated. And this is my analysis. I think what he lacked the most, and it's very important, remember, you're really being judged in a lot of ways in a speech like this from the neck upwards. Mm-hmm. He really didn't have an interesting face. What do I mean by that? a variety of facial expression and showing a wide range of emotion on your face really helps the audience to connect you and to relate to how you might be feeling inside.
Did you give him a score?
Yes, thank you so much for asking. I scored him quite high, a 72 out of 100.
All right, so we've got Monica Murphy. You were at 70, was it 70, 71? 72. And Robin Maxfield, how did you do with scoring for Marco Rubio?
Well, I scored him highest on his vocal variety, and I agreed that his facial expression, that was the lowest. That and eye contact. In the very beginning, he was making no eye contact with us at home, the listeners, and that was frustrating. And I want to add that I like his Ricky Martin skin.
Well, I suppose that's part of it. I thought he had great vocal variety. In other words, this was one of those speeches in the convention so far that did not sound like a convention speech. He really was telling a story. It didn't have that same pattern. He's a very good speaker, and he broke up the sound of the speech in terms of inflection and volume. A little bit of a disconnect with the facial expressions and
Right.
from what he was saying and what I was seeing. But Laurie, go ahead.
Piggybacking on what you're saying, Dennis, his phrasing also helped him to be interesting. So listen to, for example, he said Obama's not a bad person, he's a bad president. And that is a wonderful speech device to use the same word, in this case, the word bad person, bad president. So that's called parallelism. When both sides of the phrase, both sides of the sentence use the same words, it becomes almost lyrical, or someone might even say sort of poetic to listen to.
There were several like that. One that I caught was one that he said, "Hope and change has become divide and conquer." There's a parallelism, the same thing. Of course, hope and change being the message of the Obama campaign, and divide and conquer what the Republicans are depicting it to be. Robin, you were going to say?
I agree with that, and I also caught the forward and the backward. I thought that it was very poetic.
All right, so overall, we thought he was a pretty good speaker. He
Yes.
did a good job tonight, Marco Rubio, so we're looking favorably upon him. And it'll be interesting to see where he goes with this speech capability that he has. We know it's launched an awful lot of successful politicians who have started out exactly like this. All right, let's get to the man of the hour, Mitt Romney, and let's see how he did. Now, we're not. You notice, folks, we're not talking about Clint Eastwood, who was there tonight and who had an interesting thing, but we're not evaluating him. He's not one of the major political candidates, actually. He's not really one of the major speakers here, just sort of a special guest. But we're not going to talk about him, but we do recognize he was there. And let's move on to Mitt Romney. All right, Monica Murphy, let's talk about Mitt Romney. How do you think he did? What did you notice?
I thought Mitt Romney actually did a very good job tonight. I think the expectations were a little low for how he would deliver in terms of his presentation style. And really, I felt I got a little bit more information about the man versus the message. So on those levels, I thought that it was effective in giving us a sense more about more in humanizing him. I think overall the goal was to try to humanize him tonight, and I think through the video that they showed, that's where I felt the most humanizing, was seeing the video clips of his children jumping on him. I thought that, non-verbally they created that. But in terms of his delivery style, I gave him overall a 67 out of 100.
All right, Robin Maxfield, you're next.
For Mitt, he got a 61% from me. I scored him the highest in connection. Scored him pretty low on gestures and body language. There wasn't a lot of movement there. As far as storytelling, he told the story about growing up in Detroit, and that one landed very flat. It was just a series of facts. Further on, though, when he told the story of the rose by the bedside table, that was a big hit. That was a very emotive story. It had the details in it, very specific details, and it obviously affected the crowd strongly. Then he bounced out of that story, the theme of that story, which was the strength of the woman, and tied it right into naming all of the women that were there. So I thought that was very effective.
Good. Well, Laurie, how'd you do with Mitt Romney? What do you think?
I gave Mitt a 67 out of 100, so he did well overall. Most people feel that he exceeded their expectations. Was he stiff? He's known for being stiff. I've been thinking a lot about what makes somebody come across as stiff or awkward, and I think he revealed some of that tonight. Number one, his head sort of moves in choppy or awkward ways. His facial expressions, for me, were somewhat unusual. Sometimes he looked humble. Sometimes he looked close to tears. When he was talking business, that's when his facial expression seemed the most comfortable. But again, in these kinds of situations, which are very challenging, you are being watched from the neck up. And then it seemed like his arms were almost too close to his sides, so you couldn't really see a lot of gestures most of the time. Then also there's the issue of consistency. Sometimes he was really good, like at the end, and he got the crowd going. But then sometimes his phrasing wasn't so hot. So consistency is the hallmark of a great speaker. He's not quite there yet, but he's going to get a lot of practice.
Laurie, I think you are being way too hard on this. I think he did a very good job in terms of using as much facial expression as he could. He didn't gesticulate, as we say a lot, with his hands, but he used his brow. I even saw some tear in his eye when he was talking about the stories about taking care of Anne when she was sick, and the stories about his mother and his father and the love they had for each other. So I think it was one of the best emotive talks I've seen Mitt Romney give.
Right, but the thing, I guess what I'm missing is was he presidential? That's what I'm concerned about.
And Monica, you say
Or
he used his
authoritative
brow,
enough.
but his brow just went up and down. That was it. Didn't do anything else.
Well,
That's a stunner right there. That stopped
What
everything.
can you do with your brow, Robin?
All right, let me weigh in here a little bit here, because
Please.
I've been watching him for a long time, and here at the Speech Improvement Company, we've coached an awful lot of politicians over the years, and we've been in presidential campaigns, and some of the folks that you've been seeing on the convention floor, we're not going to name names, of course, of people that we know. We've coached some of them. Here's my concern about Romney, and I thought this was exactly what happened tonight. He is too executive. Part of the reason his likability is down and he doesn't connect with people is because he talks like an executive. And I'm talking now about two parts. The first is speed. And I've mentioned speed a lot with these speakers, rate and pace. It's always the same, no matter whether he's telling the story about the Rose or his mom and dad or whatever, or he's talking about policy. Speed is pretty much the same all the time. But more importantly than that is inflection. And inflection is the stress or emphasis that a speaker puts in a particular word or phrase to create meaning. His is almost always the same. Now, you listen carefully to when he speaks. He'll speak on a straight inflection and then drop off at the end. Straight inflection and then drop off at the end. Not all the time, obviously, but enough times that he sounds like a boss. He sounds like he's the executive. I'm telling you this, and I don't want any discussion. This is it, and this is it, and that's all I have to say. It drops off at the end. That's the way he's lived. That's what he is. He's got that sound of an executive, and that's why he's having difficulty connecting with people. And we'll listen next week for Barack Obama. But for me, that speech tonight had all of that executive sound in it, and that bothered me.
Right.
Now, one other thing I want to note about this was the ending. I thought he did a great job. That was the best part of the whole speech for me with him. But he misses opportunities. For example, he had the crowd going at one point. He'd say something, they'd say, no. He'd say something, they'd say, no. This is rhetorical redundancy. There was one time where he did it 4 times, and then they were so into it, and he didn't capitalize. He just went down like that. It just stopped. The whole thing just stopped. Missed opportunity to get that crowd into it. And there were several of those kind of opportunities that happened. And it's not just with Mitt Romney. I mean, I've said this about other speakers. They don't seem to get that sense of rhythm. It all sounds like it's a convention speech that's been written and practiced just for that environment, and it doesn't connect.
It has.
But he's got to connect. They all have to connect with people other than the 20,000 in that room.
Right, I agree with you. I mean, we live in an interactive age, and you would think that they would want the interaction with the crowd.
Yeah, well, I would think so.
We're counting like zillions of missed opportunities.
No, I think there's too many missed opportunities. And what concerns me about these speakers is that it doesn't come across as sincere as it needs to be. And we're not even talking about policy issues. One nice thing he did do, by the way, he said, I have a 5-step plan. Mm-hmm. And some speakers say, first, blah, 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 blah. Next, I'll blah, blah, blah. Then I'll blah, 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 blah. What he did was really nice. He said first, blah, blah, blah. Second, blah, blah, blah. Third, blah, blah, blah. He said they were numbers, and he numbered them. That's a nice technique. It's continuity. It was a great deal of consistency there, and I thought it was much easier to follow him. So
I think to that point, Dennis, the numerical transition that he used, like you just said, and we always talk with clients about that, how it helps listeners stay focused. I do think that maybe using more of those, having more numerical transition and more pointed content is what listeners were looking for, and I think we were a little disappointed because we didn't hear it in the message. We were looking for it non-verbally, that guidance, and I just don't think that that particular part was there.
well, did you notice even at the end when he was finished, I thought the production people of the convention didn't do him any service. He just stood there alone for a while. And he's a fairly stiff guy. He doesn't
I thought
move
he held
around much.
himself terrifically during that time, smiling, moving,
smiling.
waving. He needed to show that smile, and
I
it
hear
was
that.
awkward, but I thought he filled that time very well.
He has a great smile. He's a good-looking guy, but to me, he was just a little bit more stiff than I would have liked to seen. I would like to seen some passion other than hear of it.
I think our listeners are really hearing how many ingredients go into being a good speaker.
Good point, Laurie. Good
And,
point.
Absolutely.
and also, I think our listeners are hearing how each of us are noticing different elements of a speaker's delivery.
And
Well,
that's
the-
what you have to think about when you're addressing an audience, a wide, varied audience. How many ingredients do you need to include to create the right formula so that you seem, in this case, presidential from a style standpoint?
And
One of
that's
the-
where
one
I
of the-
think he might have failed. Maybe
One of
a
the
little more
major
human.
ingredients that we've all mentioned for all of the speakers, and happened again tonight, was storytelling. So how important is storytelling in all of this, Robin Maxfield? What do you think? Storytelling coach that you are.
Well, it depends on what your objective is. So for this, if we're saying the objective is connection, storytelling brings the emotion. It's the fastest way to connect with the listeners.
Or singing the national anthem, which he was doing, which I thought was wonderful, and holding up the kids and playing with the
He likes
balloons.
to sing.
Okay,
Despite his
good. That's a
voice.
little bit beyond the speaking, but it all counts. All right. That's all we have time for tonight or today on this edition of electionspeakers.com. We'll be back with more of the most unique critique of the important speakers in this 2012 presidential campaign. We'll be back actually next week on the first night of the Democratic Convention. We'll be here with you every night for the Democratic Convention as we have been for the Republican Convention, and we'll talk more about what happens after that when we see you then. In the meantime, I want to thank our coaches for stopping in tonight. Laurie Schloff, as always, of course, thank you for coming. Monica Murphy and Robin Maxfield. And until next time, I'm Dr. Dennis Becker saying thanks for listening and bye for now.